this verse of the great St. Augustine, the hope we have will not let us down, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit given to us. And Paul's going to develop what all that means now. He speaks to us of different reasons why we're people of hope. Firstly, there's a vision of hope as we look at the whole of creation, and we can see that it's groaning towards its fulfillment. Then we're going to look at our own personal yearnings and longings and groanings too for fulfillment. Then we're going to look at how, when we're weak, God's Spirit comes and helps us in a way that is beyond words. And finally, a little bit of a glimpse of God's glorious plan of what's happening to us in the whole wide scheme of things. So, verses 14 to 17 now. All those whose lives are shaped by God's Spirit are sons and daughters of God. Now, the idea that God's chosen people, Israel, is God's beloved son, is very, very strong in the Old Testament. In Exodus chapter 4, that foundational book, Exodus chapter 4, verses 22 and the following, the Lord tells Moses what to say to Pharaoh. Israel is my son, my firstborn. Let my people go so that they can worship me. The Jewish people clearly have a strong sense that they are God's beloved sons and daughters. They enjoy an intimacy with God that no other people really have. It's quite distinctive about the Jewish people, their sense of God as their Father. In the wilderness, the Israelites were tempted to forego this intimacy and return back to Egypt where they were slaves. Perhaps Paul is saying that this temptation is a temptation that is perennial in a sense. He says this, it isn't a spirit of slavery that you have received, something to drive you back into fear. No, you have received a spirit of sonship in which we cry out, Abba, Father. That is quite extraordinary, isn't it? We're not meant to be people of fear. That's going back into the old world. We're meant to have a strong sense that we're God's beloved sons and daughters. Now the word Abba, as I'm sure we've heard before, is an Aramaic word. It's a beautiful word. It's a sort of word that a son or a daughter would use towards their dad. Always through life. It's not just a kid's word. It's the word that an adult would use too. It's a rather beautiful word to use for God. And that Jesus used it, we know so strongly, and therefore it's quite precious. It's quite venerable for us. One of the few Aramaic words that we have preserved for us in the New Testament. So it certainly goes back to Jesus. However, we shouldn't just say that Jesus alone gave us the word Abba, because there is a strong sense of God as Father and us as God's beloved children in the Jewish faith as well. We're not only sons and daughters, he goes on to say, we're heirs, where we inherit something. We naturally think of what God promised to Abraham and how Christians now enjoy that heritage. As all things belong to Christ, we have a sense that the whole world is ours now to enjoy and to be part of. St. Francis of Assisi had that strong sense of belonging to the whole of creation, which he called everything in it my brothers and sisters, even Sister Death. Next now we turn to verses 18 to 22 of this glorious chapter. These are glorious words now, which really, for us, evoke an extraordinary sense of what God is doing in the whole of his creation. It's a magnificent text now. Bishop Tom Wright says, here we can see, in these verses, in astonishing clarity, the whole plan of salvation for all of God's creation. And once you've glimpsed this view, you'll never forget it. In Jewish thinking, the fate of the planet is intimately tied up with the fate of you and me, with us human beings. In Genesis chapter 3, which is foundational for this thinking, Adam fell into sin, and the beautiful Garden of Eden now becomes a place of toil and of hardship. A little bit further on in chapter 9 of the book of Genesis, Yahweh says to Noah that the covenant is between myself and you and every living creature. All the animals, fish, and so on. If we add to this sense from the book of Genesis of the connection between human beings and all of creation, if we add apocalyptic thinking, if you think of what's going to happen at the end times, we're going to see the sun darkened and the moon won't give its light and the stars are going to fall from heaven and so on. So at the end, it's going to be all of creation involved in it, not just us as well. And so we can say, poetically if you like, that because of Adam's sin, the whole of creation is also bound and waiting for its liberation. It's groaning to be liberated. When God's children once again become stewards of creation, as Adam and Eve were in the garden. And when that happens, of course, is when the resurrection takes place. And then creation itself will be transformed. Now, this beautiful passage, of course, for us today, with our sense of ecology, is magnificent, because it teaches us to see ourselves planted within the whole of creation. And there's another image in all this. It's the image of childbirth, the birth pangs of something new being born. We have this sense of the new era of the Messiah, a new age, something better is about to happen. We have a sense that we are helping a new world to be born. Then we're going to move a little bit further, turning to ourselves now. We have a reason to hope because of what the Spirit is doing within us. We have the first fruits in the shape of the Spirit, given with respect to ourselves, says St. Paul. Verses 23 to 25 we are. In the harvest ritual of the Jewish nation, the first fruits of the harvest are